I was living in a 5x10 storage unit, eating cold soup straight from the can, when I found the briefcase with my name on it. 6 months earlier, I had a husband, 2 children, a home filled with laughter, and a job I loved. Then my sister took it all. My husband, my career, even my kids. She called it fate. He called it an upgrade. I called it the day I stopped believing in family. That night, I got a text from my ex-husband. "You'll die poor and alone." I almost believed him until I pried open that briefcase and saw the stacks of cash and a letter from my dead uncle. This is just travel money. The real fortune waits at these coordinates. What I found at those coordinates didn't just change my life. It changed everything I thought I knew about love, betrayal, and blood. My name is Emily Hartman, and 6 months ago, my life looked perfect from the outside. I was married to Ethan, a charming project manager with a smile that made people trust him too easily. We had 2 beautiful kids, Liam, 14, who loved football, and Sophie, 10, who still slept with her stuffed bunny. We lived in a cozy 2-story house in Riverbend, Oregon, with blue shutters and a porch swing Ethan built himself. I worked as a senior designer at Riverbend Architecture, a firm I had helped grow from scratch. Ironically, my younger sister Chloe worked there too. Everyone admired her, the confident one, the life of the office. I used to think we were a team, sisters against the world, until that Thursday. It was late afternoon when an anonymous email landed in my inbox with the subject line, "You deserve to know." And no. Attached was a single photo, Ethan and Chloe, kissing in the parking lot behind our office. My stomach flipped. My first thought was, this must be edited. My second was, why does the background look so familiar? I left my desk shaking. By the time I reached home, my chest felt like it was filled with shards of glass. Ethan was in the kitchen, scrolling through his phone like nothing was wrong. "Ethan," I whispered, holding up my phone. "What is this?" He glanced at the photo, sighed, and set his phone down. "Emily, don't make a scene." "A scene?" I said, my voice cracking. "That's my sister." He rubbed his temples like I was the problem. "You were always so busy, so distant. Chloe understands me. This wasn't supposed to happen, but it did." I stood there, frozen, as every memory of family dinners, vacations, and shared laughter collapsed in on itself. When Chloe showed up at the office the next day, she didn't even look ashamed. She walked in with a new haircut, her hand on Ethan's arm. By Monday, my boss called me in. "We've decided to go in a different direction," he said softly. "Chloe will be taking over your role." It wasn't a different direction. It was exile. Within weeks, Ethan filed for divorce. He used every lie he could find that I was unstable, neglectful, obsessed with work. He got the house, the custody, and my sister smiling beside him in court. The night the papers were finalized, I stood outside the courthouse in the rain, clutching an umbrella that wouldn't open. My phone buzzed. A text from Ethan, "You'll die poor and alone. Chloe's already a better mother to our kids than you ever were." That was the moment something inside me broke quietly, completely. And yet, I didn't know it then. But the moment I lost everything was the moment my real story began. After that text, I stopped feeling like a person. I was a shadow haunting my own life, a ghost standing outside the window of a family that used to be mine. Ethan and Chloe moved into our house. The kids stayed with them. Liam's football photos started appearing online again, except Ethan was in them now, smiling like nothing had ever happened. Sophie looked smaller, quieter. When I called, Chloe answered and said calmly, "They're fine, Emily. Maybe it's better if you give them space." Give them space. From their own mother. Within weeks, my savings vanished into lawyer fees and rent I couldn't afford. Then I got the letter my job severance adjusted due to misconduct. They said I had accessed private company files. Chloe had made sure of that. I remember standing in the grocery store that day, holding a carton of milk, realizing my debit card would decline. The world spun, and I had to steady myself on the cart. I walked out empty-handed. By the end of the month, I was sleeping in my car behind a closed diner, using the restroom to wash my face. When the owner caught me one morning, he said kindly, "There's a place down by the highway, the storage units. Quiet. Cheap. That's how I ended up there in Unit 32B. 10 feet long, 5 feet wide, just enough for a cot, a lantern, and 2 boxes of clothes. The walls smelled of metal and old cigarette smoke. I used a camping stove to heat soup and borrowed Wi-Fi from the gas station across the street. Each night, I fell asleep to the sound of rain tapping the thin roof, whispering that this was all I'd ever be, a woman forgotten by her own family. But then came that night. I'd sold my wedding ring for $40 at a pawn shop and used half of it to buy gas for my tiny car. When I returned to the unit, my flashlight beam caught something behind a broken chair, a flash of brown leather. An old briefcase, dust-covered, the handle cracked. I pulled it out and nearly dropped it when I saw the luggage tag, Emily J. Hartman. I frowned. I'd never owned anything like it. The lock was old-fashioned, with a 3-digit code. I tried 101, my birthday, our wedding date. Nothing worked. I set it aside, wrapping myself in a blanket, but sleep wouldn't come. The silence pressed on me, heavy as guilt. Outside, the wind howled through the gaps in the metal door. Finally, around 2 a.m., I sat up, grabbed my screwdriver, and whispered, "You took everything, Ethan, but maybe not this." The lock snapped open with a metallic click. Inside, something shimmered in the weak lantern light, stacks of crisp $100 bills, and a yellowed note, folded neatly on top. That night, in a cold storage unit on the edge of nowhere, I learned that sometimes the universe doesn't whisper. Sometimes it leaves you a message and dares you to follow it. My hands were shaking so hard the paper nearly tore between my fingers. The handwriting was crooked, but familiar loops that leaned too far right, like the writer was in a hurry. I hadn't seen it in over 10 years. "Emily," the note began, "if you're reading this, you've lost everything. Good. Only when the lies are stripped away can you see the truth. The money inside this case is travel money. The real fortune and the truth about your father's death waits at these coordinates in Montana." At the bottom, in fading ink, was a signature. Uncle Raymond. For a second, I couldn't breathe. Uncle Raymond had been my father's older brother, a war veteran who'd returned from Vietnam, half-broken, paranoid, and distant. When I was little, he'd visit on Thanksgiving, muttering about wolves in suits, and warning my dad to watch his back. After my father's accident at the sawmill, Raymond disappeared into the mountains. Everyone said he'd gone insane. I used to believe them. Now, sitting there in the dim glow of my lantern, I wasn't so sure. I unfolded the rest of the paper. Coordinates were scribbled on the bottom. 47.0916 degrees north, 113.9948 degrees west, Timberwolf Trail, Montana. Montana. Almost 1,000 miles away. I laughed bitterly. "Sure, Uncle Raymond. Just a little road trip," I muttered. But something about that line, "the truth about your father's death," burned in my chest. My dad's death had never made sense. The sawmill accident report was full of holes, but every time I asked questions growing up, Mom would go pale and whisper, "Let the dead rest, Emily." Now I wondered if she'd been scared. I counted the money. $49,000 in neat stacks, sealed with paper bands from a local bank. It wasn't drug money. The bills were too new, too orderly. The note wasn't a joke. This was real. I spent the rest of the night pacing the narrow floor of the storage unit, clutching the letter like a lifeline. What did he mean by fortune? Did Raymond have money? Or was it something else? Evidence, maybe? When dawn crept through the metal slats, I made my decision. I sold the last of my jewelry, packed a duffel with clothes, a flashlight, and a road map. I bought an old Ford Escape from a man who didn't ask questions. As I filled the gas tank, I caught my reflection in the side mirror. Hollow eyes, pale skin. But behind that, something new. A glimmer I hadn't seen in months. Hope. Before pulling out onto the highway, I looked back once at the storage lot, my concrete cocoon. "Goodbye, rock bottom," I whispered. "Time to find out what you were hiding." Then I pressed the pedal and drove toward the only thing left that made sense, the truth. The drive from Oregon to Montana felt like crossing through the remains of my old life. Each mile marker was a goodbye to Ethan, to Chloe, to the woman who used to believe that love meant safety. I left before sunrise, The $49,000 sealed in a plastic bag under the passenger seat. Every time I hit a bump, the briefcase rattled like it was alive, whispering, "Keep going." Gas station coffee became my breakfast. Motels became strangers' kindness. I drove through endless pine forests, snow-dusted towns, and roads so empty that the radio static felt like company. At night, when the road blurred into darkness, I'd catch myself imagining my kids. Liam's laugh, Sophie's sleepy voice saying, "Good night, Mommy." Then I'd remember Chloe brushing Sophie's hair the same way I used to, and my grip would tighten on the wheel until my knuckles turned white. By the third day, the air had changed. Thinner, colder, wilder. The GPS signal dropped just outside Flathead County. The screen flashed, "No service," as if warning me. "You're on your own from here." The coordinates led to a dirt road hidden behind a tangle of spruce trees, Timberwolf Trail. The name from the letter. I turned onto it slowly. The road was more like a scar through the forest, uneven and narrow, the tires crunching against frozen ground. After half a mile, I saw the rusted red gate, hanging crooked on its hinges. A faded private property sign swung in the wind. My heart pounded. I got out of the car, snow crunching under my boots, and tried the key that had been taped to the bottom of the briefcase. It fit. The gate creaked open, a sound like the groan of something ancient waking up. Beyond it, the world went silent. No cars, no wind, just the hush of snow falling from tree branches. I followed the path on foot, my breath fogging in front of me. The woods closed in, swallowing the weak light. Then, just like the note said, I found it a massive boulder, jagged and gray, shaped unmistakably, like a bear's head staring at the sky. Behind it, half buried in snow, stood a cabin. Not an old shack, but a solid, modern structure with metal shutters, solar panels on the roof, and a generator still humming faintly. For a long time I just stared. My pulse thudded in my ears. "Uncle Raymond," I whispered. "What the hell were you doing out here?" I climbed the steps, my fingers trembling as I reached for the handle. It was cold, too cold. I turned it. The door clicked open easily, as if it had been waiting for me. And when I stepped inside, I knew I hadn't just found a cabin. I had walked straight into a secret my family had been burying for decades. The air inside the cabin was sharp, dry, and smelled faintly of dust and oil like a place sealed away for too long. I flicked on my flashlight, and the beam hit a wall covered in photographs, newspaper clippings, and handwritten notes. Strings of red yarn connected faces, names, dates. My breath caught. It looked like something from a detective's nightmare, or a genius's obsession. Front and center, there was a picture of my father, James Hartman, shaking hands with another man outside a sawmill. The caption, written in Uncle Raymond's familiar scrawl, read, "Partnership Agreement 1987, James Hartman and Richard Caldwell." Richard Caldwell. Ethan's father. The sight made my stomach turn. My dad had died in a mill accident that same year. The same man who stood smiling beside him in the photo went on to build Caldwell Industries, the company that owned half the town. I moved the flashlight, following the red string. It led to a folder pinned beneath another note. "They killed him for the rights." My heart hammered. I opened the folder and found copies of police reports, maintenance records, and insurance forms. According to the documents, my father had refused to sell his share of mineral rights beneath the mill property. The day before he died, he'd signed papers protecting his ownership and naming Raymond as witness. The next morning, the accident happened. A malfunctioning loader crushed him instantly. But Raymond's notes told another story. Loader service 24 hours earlier. Safety system tampered with. Insurance policy increased by Caldwell Sr. 3 months prior. I swallowed hard. "Oh my God, Dad." On the opposite wall, another section was labeled, "C. Hartman." My hands trembled as I flipped through it. Photos of Chloe, my sister dating back years. One of her at 17, standing outside a cafe with Richard Caldwell. Another, at 20, signing a check, from Caldwell Enterprises. Tucked between the photos was a small tape recorder. The label read, "Riverside Motel, 2011. I pressed play. Static. Then Chloe's voice. She trusts me completely. Ethan's falling for me already. Another voice. Deeper. Older Richard Caldwell. Good. Once she's out of the picture, Ethan inherits through the marriage, and we own the mineral rights through the kids. Keep her compliant. My knees went weak. The recorder fell from my hands. Chloe hadn't just betrayed me. She'd been trained to, groomed by Ethan's father to destroy our family, to secure the fortune my father had died protecting. I stumbled to the desk, clutching the edges to keep myself upright. That's when I saw a sealed envelope, neatly labeled, "Final instructions for Emily only." Inside was a legal document, Uncle Raymond's will. He'd left me everything. His land, his accounts, and something else. Ownership of the Hartman mineral rights. Estimated value over $80 million. Tears blurred my vision. All these years, I'd been told I was weak, naive, broken, but my uncle had known the truth. He'd been preparing me, waiting for me to find this place. And now I finally understood what he meant in his letter. When the lies are stripped away, you'll see who the wolves really are. Oh, my sister, my husband, their families. They hadn't just stolen my life, they'd built their empire on my father's grave. For hours, I sat in the cabin, surrounded by papers that redefined everything I thought I knew about my life. Outside, the wind howled through the trees like it carried the ghosts of everyone who'd kept silent. On the desk were boxes full of labeled recordings, bank slips, and flash drives, years of evidence. Uncle Raymond had documented everything. Payments from Caldwell Industries to judges, hidden accounts in the Caymans, even emails between Ethan and Chloe, the earliest dated months before I ever suspected anything. My hands trembled as I scrolled through one of Raymond's typed notes. If they destroy you, it means you're close to the truth. Don't run. Expose them. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear every document apart, throw them into the snow, and forget it all. But then I saw a photo, one that stopped me cold. Me, at my wedding, radiant and smiling. Behind me, in the crowd, was Richard Caldwell. How had I never noticed? He'd been there the whole time, watching. My marriage, my career, even my family, all pieces of a puzzle that ended here, in this frozen cabin. I sank into the chair, holding my head in my hands. For a long time, I just sat there, listening to the hum of the generator. When I finally looked up, I saw another envelope taped to the underside of the desk. On it, my uncle had written in trembling letters, "Your choice defines everything." Inside were 2 items, a USB drive and a single-page letter. The letter read, "Emily, I couldn't save your father, but I can give you the chance to save yourself. This USB holds every record of what they did, enough to bring down the Caldwells and their allies. You can take the money and vanish. Start over. No one would blame you. Or you can finish what I started. But understand, the truth will cost you peace before it sets you free." I stared at the USB drive in my palm, small and harmless looking. Yet it carried 40 years of secrets, of blood, betrayal, and greed. What would I even do? March into a police station? Call the FBI? They had power, lawyers, friends, in every corner. They'd already taken my children, and if I went after them, they'd come for me again. But then I remembered Liam's voice when he was 5 years old, tugging my sleeve at bedtime. "Mommy, Daddy says bad people always get caught." My throat tightened. "Yeah," I whispered into the empty room. "They do." I packed every file, every drive, every tape into a duffel bag. The snow outside had stopped, and the sky was bleeding into shades of gray and pink. Dawn. As I locked the cabin door behind me, I looked back once, not as a farewell, but as a promise. "Uncle Raymond," I murmured, "you didn't live long enough to finish this, but I will." Then I climbed into the car, set the USB drive on the passenger seat beside the briefcase, and started the engine. By the time I reached cell service again, I knew exactly who to call. "FBI Field Office, Seattle," I said. "I have evidence of a 30-year cover-up, and I'm ready to talk." It took almost 5 months for everything to unravel. 5 months of phone calls, interviews, and nights where I barely slept. The FBI assigned me to Agent Patricia Nollis, a woman with sharp gray eyes and the patience of a surgeon. At first, she didn't believe me. She'd probably heard 100 stories like mine, desperate people chasing conspiracies to justify their pain. But then I handed her Uncle Raymond's files. And the USB? And the tape. The one with Chloe's voice. The next day, she called me back, her voice low and urgent. "Emily, this is bigger than we thought. You need to stay quiet. For now." So I did. I stayed invisible, a woman no one noticed in a cheap motel off Highway 2, living on takeout food and nightmares. Every week, Agent Nollis updated me in short, cautious calls. "We've traced the accounts. We've subpoenaed old insurance records. We're getting close." Then, one morning, I woke to the sound of my phone vibrating across the table. "It's happening," Nollis said. "Stay where you are. Turn on the news." On the screen, I saw the impossible. Ethan Caldwell, my ex-husband, being led out of a country club in handcuffs. Cameras flashing, reporters shouting his name. Behind him, Richard Caldwell, pale and furious, shielding his face. And Chloe, my sister, covering her head with a jacket as agents escorted her into a black SUV. The crawl at the bottom of the screen read, "FBI raids Caldwell Industries, in $80M, fraud and murder cover, up investigation." My hands went numb. I sank to the floor, laughing and crying at the same time. For years, they'd taken everything from me, my family, my job, my children, my dignity, and now they were finally facing the light. But the real storm hadn't even started. 2 weeks later, I was subpoenaed to testify. The trial was held in Seattle Federal Court, packed with reporters, cameras, and too many curious faces. When I walked into that courtroom, I felt like every step was a battle between the old me and the woman I'd become. Ethan sat at the defense table, wearing an expensive suit, looking smaller than I remembered. His eyes met mine for a fraction of a second, and then darted away. Chloe sat beside him, wrists trembling, mascara streaked. When the prosecutor called my name, I took the stand. "Please state your name." "Emily Hartman." "Miss Hartman, how are you connected to the defendants?" "They're my family," I said quietly. Or they were. I told them everything. The affair, the job, the storage unit, the briefcase, the cabin, every lie, every bribe, every voice on those recordings. The courtroom was silent, except for the scratching of pens. When they played the tape, Chloe's voice saying, "She trusts me completely," I heard someone in the back gasp. Chloe covered her face. Ethan glared at her, jaw clenched, the empire of deceit they'd built cracking right there in public. At one point, Ethan's lawyer tried to paint me as unstable. "Miss Hartman, you lived in a storage unit, correct?" "Yes," I said. "Because your client took everything from me, and now he's going to answer for it." The jury's faces hardened after that. The verdict came 4 days later. Ethan Caldwell, 18 years for fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. Chloe Hartman, 12 years for perjury and aiding cover-up. Richard Caldwell, awaiting trial, died in custody before sentencing. When the gavel fell, the courtroom exhaled. I didn't cheer. I didn't cry. I just sat there, my hands folded, feeling something deeper than victory release. Afterward, Chloe asked to see me. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met in a holding room, separated by glass. She looked smaller, her hair tied back, her eyes hollow. "You were never supposed to find out," she whispered. "You always said I was too naive," I replied. "Guess I finally learned." "Ethan, he made promises. He said we'd be rich. He said he loved me. He said the same to me once." She cried then, quiet, ashamed tears. For the first time, I almost pitied her. Almost. "You could have told me," I said softly. "You were my sister." "I know," she sobbed. "And that's what makes it worse." When I walked out of that room, the air felt lighter. Outside the courthouse, the sky was pale gray, snow beginning to fall, the same kind that had blanketed the cabin the day I found it. I tilted my head back, letting the flakes sting my face. For the first time in years, I wasn't running. Justice had finally come knocking, not for vengeance, but for truth. And as I walked away from that courthouse, I realized something Uncle Raymond had known all along. You don't have to destroy the people who broke you. Sometimes, all you have to do is survive long enough to watch them face the truth. 6 months after the verdict, I woke up to the sound of birds outside my new window. Real birds, not the muffled echoes of traffic or the metallic clatter of a storage unit door. I'd bought a small farmhouse outside Portland with white shutters, a garden overrun by wild daisies, and just enough quiet to finally hear myself think. The first morning there, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee and watched the sunrise. It wasn't fancy, it wasn't grand, but it was mine. The FBI had wired me the remainder of Uncle Raymond's estate accounts, land shares, mineral rights, everything he'd hidden for decades. $80 million. A number that once would have sounded like fantasy. Now, it just felt like responsibility. I didn't buy luxury. I bought freedom. I started a small foundation in Raymond's name, the Hartman Hope Fund, to help women rebuild their lives after betrayal, abuse, or financial ruin. Every story that came through our doors reminded me of that cold night in the storage unit, and how, sometimes, losing everything is the only way to start over. Liam and Sophie visit every weekend. The first time they came, they stood awkwardly on the porch, unsure whether to run into my arms or keep their distance. I knelt down, smiled through tears, and said, "You can always come home to me, no matter what anyone told you." Sophie was the first to move. She hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. Liam followed, quiet, hesitant, but when his arms wrapped around me, the years of silence between us finally shattered. We spent the afternoon baking cookies, laughing at my burnt attempts, and watching old cartoons together. That night, Sophie fell asleep on the couch, her head in my lap. Liam looked up from his phone and said softly, "Mom, I'm proud of you." I almost broke down right there. Sometimes, I drive past the old storage facility. My Unit 32B is still there. I keep paying the $89 a month, though there's nothing left inside. It's my reminder. My scar-turned sanctuary. That's where the old me died, the woman who thought love had to hurt. That silence was safety, and that family meant loyalty no matter the cost. Uncle Raymond was right. The truth did cost me peace before it set me free. But freedom, real freedom, is worth every scar. Now, when people ask about my story, I tell them this: I lost a husband, a sister, and almost my sanity. But I gained something no betrayal can steal: clarity, purpose, and 2 children who know their mother never gave up. My name is Emily Hartman. I was left for dead by the people I loved most. But I rose not to seek revenge, but to rebuild. Because sometimes, the ashes of your old life aren't ruins at all. They're the soil where your new one begins. And as I sit on that porch, watching the sunrise spill gold across the fields, I whisper the words Uncle Raymond once wrote, the words that saved me. Truth isn't easy, but it's freedom. And freedom is everything.